I'm very pleased to introduce now Veronica Mendez-Moore, who is co-director for CETUL. For over 19 years, Veronica has organized and developed leadership with low-wage workers to fight for fair wages, working conditions, and other related factors across the Twin Cities. We are truly fortunate to have her insight on the role of advocacy groups and workers in workplace justice. And so, Veronica, I turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I I am happy to be here, happy to be talking to all of you. I think it's so important that we're shining a light on both um, how deep of a problem this is, but like more importantly, how broad of a problem this is. And I think Terry gave some statistics at the beginning that really show like how prevalent wage theft is across like in low wage worker industries, and how much bigger it is than property theft. And just like this is like an incredibly pervasive problem that I think so many of us just don't see. We don't see it. It's not out in the news as much. There's a much smaller workforce of professionals that are enforcing it. We think about property theft and police. We think about wage theft and the very small infrastructure of investigators in cities and states and at the federal level. And so this is a tremendous problem. And some of what I wanted to do today in my conversation with you all is to shed a little bit of light on like sort of digging in on some of the stories and how this is impacting workers. So I've been the co-director of CETUL for 15 years. And in that time, we've had thousands and thousands of workers come in facing different problems at work. The primary thing that people come in around is wage theft. And the reason they come to us is because we're bilingual in English and Spanish. And so we speak the language when we're thinking about Spanish speaking folks. We also are unconcerned about documentation status, whether or not folks are undocumented or documented. And we're a community organization. And so folks feel comfortable. There's like really a space for people to come in and feel welcomed and not feel like, oh, I'm walking into a bureaucracy that I don't understand. And people feel, like that we have the capacity and the know-how to really make people feel welcomed and become a part of the organization. So I think that is critical to why people come to us. This is a story. I wanted to share a few stories from some of the workers that have come through our worker center. Emilio Miranda Rios is a worker who has been a member of CETUL for about 10 years now. He was subcontracted as a janitor at Home Depot stores. He was not paid for the extra hours that he worked, where he was doing like extra work of washing windows, which is not his regular work. So he came to CETUL. We partnered together to try to find resolution to that problem. Then he came back later. We did not in that moment find resolution. He came back later. He and his wife also had hundreds of dollars stolen for them working at Motel 6. They never appeared in the branch's payroll system. So even though they worked there, we didn't even have the documents because they were paid cash. We didn't even have the documents to be able to either prosecute them with the support of an attorney or file a wage theft complaint with the city, state, or federal. There was just no record of them even existing at this company, but they worked there. And we ended up having to figure out alternative ways to really organize other workers and stand up to this company. Then he had his wages stolen when he worked at a convenience grocery store, where he was told when he asked for his money that the Sundays he had worked were volunteer time. He had volunteered to work at a grocery store, was what he was told. And so there were thousands of dollars in money that he was not paid. So these are three. I could probably tell you 5 other stories from Emilio Miranda Rios of ways and places where he had his wages stolen. And so and this just to show how pervasive this is, even just in one person's, lifetime. Another worker I wanted to highlight is Gonzalo Monge. He's a painter, construction worker. And over the last 8 years, he had experienced at least one with us about is that he has to budget with his family with the assumption that he's only going to get a fraction of his wages. That's just how he has to live his life, because that's the way that things work in his sector of the industry. His former employees routinely break the law with little to no consequences. He's taken a number of them to conciliation court and won, but still hasn't been paid for all his wages. This isn't showing up fully on the screen, but on average, construction workers, from what we've been told, construction workers that are members of Centro, expect that about 25% of their wages every year are going to be stolen. That is how people budget, knowing that they are working 25% more than what they're going to get paid. Another story I wanted to share here. So we heard Susan Crum talk about the Ricardo Batres case. This is the first time that Hennepin County used the trafficking statute that we have, and this photo is of a press conference that we held at our office with construction workers behind our Attorney General Keith Ellison, who also played a critical role in supporting workers and in supporting this case move forward, and workers that are behind him, some of whom were impacted by this particular labor broker and labor trafficker, and then other workers who didn't work specifically under Ricardo Batres, but have had similar experiences. And like, this is the labor trafficking case that has become really public locally, but it is not the only case that's under investigation. There are a number of other cases that are under investigation. The more we're talking to construction workers, the more that we as a community organization are able to build trust through having fights like this, very public fights like this. We are able to get more folks in through word of mouth that help us build more cases, and that can help us build up bigger cases. So final piece to my slideshow here, and then I'll get into some more details, is that some of the work that we are able to do as a worker center, as I've noted in our connections with the community, is that we can actually connect to some of the most vulnerable populations. So when we're thinking about the people who are most likely to have their wages stolen, we're talking about minimum wage workers or under the table workers. We're talking particularly about workers of color. And that is where we see that the most wage theft is happening, and also where we see that the least amount of reporting is happening when it comes to like filing complaints with city, state, or federal agencies. And so this here is an example of a case where when the minimum wage went up in Minneapolis, this McDonald's franchisor just didn't raise the wage. It was made very clear to them. I mean, many of the employers I'm talking about here are not employers who like accidentally violated the law. They're employers who were clear about what they were doing. We had discussed with them many times, because we had new workers in their store, like, the minimum wage went up, this is what you need to do, and they didn't. And so because of the work of, Stephen Suffrage, who is the worker you see here, who really stood up to his bosses and then organized his coworkers to come forward, we filed a complaint multiple complaints with the city department, the Labor Standards Division, and came to a settlement where McDonald's had to pay $20,000 to workers for violating the minimum wage law. And this is, $20,000 to minimum wage workers is a ton of money. I know that as we're thinking about big cases, that prosecutors are really going after, like, $20,000 isn't necessarily the most amount of money, but we also know that there are so many more cases out there that we just need to uncover. And with the partnership of like government agencies and with the partnership with prosecutors, we can do so much more to actually uncover some of these really big cases against the employers that are just really, very intentionally violating the rights of workers. So I'm going to stop my share there. But I wanted to talk a little bit in thinking about the Ricardo Batres case, and Susan Crum mentioned like the importance of the relationship that we had. And part of that is, and it's both in that case and in all of the cases that we partner with the city on, is that we have a different kind of relationship with the workforce, with folks who are particularly vulnerable, that allow them to have trust in us. It also means that we can, and we have learned over time, like, how do we really put together a case We are not attorneys. I do not pretend to be able to put together a ready-made case and hand it over to Susan Crum or anyone else.
This is your
Um,
5-minute warning.
but we do have a lot of information that we can help come in more prepared, which has been helpful to the city and has been helpful to prosecutors. We also have the ability through those relationships to like have ongoing contact with workers. Like I think we all know also that like the most vulnerable workers are also the workers that are most likely to have their phone shut off, to kind of disappear and move, and then they don't respond to something that you mail to them. But because of the nature of our position in the community, we can still maintain contact with workers, and we do, even as people's phones change and their addresses change. So that is I think a particularly important, um, just like skill and ability that we bring into the equation. And so we deeply value the partnership, because we know that as much as we can like get a case prepared, we can't do this without prosecutors. And like we can also offer the fact that we can really communicate with people, connect people, and help support people through the process of all of the difficult emotional and tricky situations. When we went through the Batres case, we were providing also like social service support, social work support to a lot of the workers. As we're looking at other similar labor trafficking cases, we are also able to provide some of that support for workers that helps build that trust so that they stay. Because so many times when when things get really hot, it's a lot easier for a worker to say, you know what, forget it, I'm going to bail, I'm going to go back to my home country or whatever. And like we are able to really hold a case together. So I think that is been a really important piece of the work that we're able to do. I did also want to name that like with Minneapolis, the city of Minneapolis, we have a really strong relationship with the Labor Standards Division, where we are regularly partnering and communicating about, sort of similar to the task force that Susan Crum described at the county level. We are able to like have an ongoing conversation about what the problems that are happening in the industry are, and to like actually think together about how we can build the strongest cases, to not just end up going after the tiny bottom feeders that are like, you know, that have a big impact on a few people, but don't have a systemic impact, and think about how we can actually go after the some of the worst violators that can have a systemic impact, both because they employ a lot of people, and also because we can like create a public narrative around this that helps create deterrence for other employers. And so that we think is key, and it's that partnership that really makes that possible, because we can each provide each other information and know-how that the other doesn't have on their own. And I think that's really important. And I would just say like part of the way that we do that is a very low ego relationship, is a low ego, high collaboration relationship, where we really are clear that what we want to do is we want to win these cases. We want to make workers whole. We want to make systemic changes that can have an impact on a lot more workers than even just the ones who have the courage and the resources and the stability to be able to come forward. So those are some key pieces in how we build those relationships, and why they're so important, and why we want to think about better and deeper relationships with prosecutors as well as different government agencies.